The strange thing about kindness is that it often arrives when the world has already decided not to care. The rain hammered against the sidewalks of downtown Chicago with a steady rhythm, turning the city lights into blurred streaks of gold and white across the wet pavement. Most people hurried past with their heads down, focused on getting home before the storm worsened. Emily Carter was one of them. At 28, she had spent the entire day balancing spreadsheets at Harrison Technologies before rushing to pick up her 6-year-old son Noah from an after-school program. Now, after dropping him off with her elderly neighbor for an extra hour, she was walking toward a late-night grocery store, calculating whether $43 would be enough to cover milk, cereal, and the asthma medication Noah needed refilled next week. Life had become a constant exercise in choosing which bill could wait. She pulled her worn coat tighter around herself as a cold gust swept down the block. That was when she noticed the crowd. A dozen people stood beneath the bright neon glow of a luxury hotel entrance. Some were laughing. Others had their phones raised. Emily almost kept walking. Crowds usually meant trouble she could not afford to get involved in. But something made her glance back. In the center of the attention stood a tall man in an expensive charcoal overcoat. Even from across the street, she could tell the coat alone probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. His dark hair was damp from the rain, and he looked disoriented, leaning one hand against a decorative planter as though trying to regain his balance. A hotel employee appeared to be speaking to him, but the man barely responded. Around him, people whispered and recorded videos. Emily frowned. There was something uncomfortable about the scene. Nobody seemed concerned. They seemed entertained. She hesitated at the crosswalk while the light changed. Then she heard someone say, "This guy's completely wasted." Another voice laughed. "Look at him. He can barely stand." The group chuckled. The man lowered his head slightly, and for just a moment Emily caught an expression on his face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't embarrassment. It was exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that lived deeper than lack of sleep. Something tightened inside her chest. She knew that look. She had seen it in the mirror during nights when Noah's fever climbed, and she wasn't sure how she would pay the next medical bill. She had seen it during the months after Noah's father walked away and never looked back. She had seen it in people who were carrying far more than anyone around them realized. The rain intensified. Most of the crowd began retreating beneath the hotel awning, still filming. Emily sighed softly. "You don't need this tonight," she whispered to herself. But her feet were already moving. She crossed the street and approached the group. As she got closer, she noticed the man wasn't aggressive or causing problems. He simply looked lost. The hotel concierge appeared increasingly uncomfortable, unsure whether the guest should be escorted inside or left alone. Emily stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said gently. The concierge looked relieved to hear a calm voice. The man slowly lifted his eyes. They were strikingly blue, but distant, as though focused on something only he could see. "Sir," Emily said softly, "are you okay?" For a second, he didn't answer. Then his gaze settled on her face. Something seemed to shift. Not recognition, just awareness. Like someone surfacing after being underwater too long. "I'm fine," he replied quietly. His voice was deep but rough around the edges. Emily wasn't convinced. "Do you have someone you can call?" she asked. He looked away toward the rain. No, the single word sounded heavier than it should have. Behind them, someone continued recording with a phone. Emily glanced over. "Could you maybe stop filming him?" she asked. The person shrugged and walked away. The others soon followed, disappointed the scene was no longer entertaining. Within moments, the crowd had dissolved. Only Emily, the man, and the hotel employee remained. The city noise returned. The man stared at the empty sidewalk as if surprised everyone had left. Then his attention shifted briefly to Emily's wrist. A strange look crossed his face. His eyes lingered on the simple silver bracelet she wore every day. It had belonged to her mother. The expression appeared and disappeared so quickly she almost missed it. Before she could ask what was wrong, he closed his eyes for a moment and steadied himself against the planter. Emily's concern deepened. The rain continued to fall around them, while somewhere in the distance a church bell echoed through the city. And for reasons she could not yet explain, Emily Carter had the unmistakable feeling that this storm had just changed the course of her life. Emily glanced at the hotel concierge. "Can you tell me if he is staying here?" The man hesitated before nodding. "Yes, ma'am. He checked in earlier this evening." Emily looked back at the stranger. Rainwater slid from the edge of his coat while the city lights reflected across the wet sidewalk. Up close, he seemed older than she first thought, perhaps late 30s, but there was a weariness in his expression that made him look far beyond his years. "Do you know your room number?" she asked gently. He gave a faint smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "I should." The answer worried her more than if he had said no. The concierge shifted uncomfortably. "I can arrange assistance, but he declined several times already." Emily sighed. Part of her wanted to leave. Noah was waiting at home. The grocery store still needed to happen. Tomorrow morning would arrive far too soon. Yet every time she looked at the man standing alone beneath the rain, something told her walking away would stay with her longer than missing one trip to the store. "At least come inside where it is dry," she said. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. Then he nodded once. Together they stepped beneath the hotel awning. Warm air greeted them as the revolving doors opened. The marble lobby glowed with soft golden light, and a pianist played quietly near the lounge area. It felt like a completely different world from the storm outside. The stranger lowered himself into a chair near the fireplace. He rubbed one hand across his face as though fighting off a headache. Emily noticed his fingers tremble slightly. "Can I get you some water?" she asked. "Please." A few minutes later she returned carrying a glass. He accepted it with a grateful nod. "Thank you." It was the first thing he had said that sounded completely sincere. "You are welcome." Silence settled between them. Around them, wealthy guests crossed the lobby carrying designer luggage and discussing flights, meetings, and vacations. Nobody paid attention to the tired man sitting quietly in the chair. Emily checked her phone. A text from Mrs. Henderson appeared. "Noah is asleep. Do not rush." Relief washed through her chest. At least her son was safe. "You have children?" the stranger suddenly asked. Emily looked up, surprised. "One son." His gaze softened. "How old?" "6." He nodded slowly as though the answer meant something to him. "That is a good age." Emily smiled. "Most days." For the first time, a faint hint of amusement appeared on his face. Then his eyes drifted toward the silver bracelet on her wrist again. The reaction was impossible to miss this time. He stared for several seconds. "Where did you get that?" he asked quietly. Emily instinctively touched the bracelet. "My mother." Something unreadable crossed his features. Not shock exactly. Not recognition either. More like a memory brushing against the edge of consciousness. Before she could ask why, he looked away. "It is beautiful," he said. Emily frowned slightly. The answer felt incomplete. A hotel employee approached carrying a room key card. "Sir, we can escort you upstairs whenever you are ready." The man accepted the card but made no move to stand. Instead, he stared toward the rain-covered windows. Minutes passed. Then he spoke so softly Emily almost missed it. "Tomorrow is the anniversary of my mother's death." The words hung in the air. Suddenly everything made more sense. The exhaustion, the distant look, the sadness he carried like invisible weight. Emily did not know what to say. She had lost her own mother years ago. Some grief grew quieter with time. Some simply learned how to hide. "I am sorry," she said. He nodded once. "So am I." Outside, thunder rolled across the city skyline. Inside, neither of them spoke for several moments. Then the stranger closed his eyes briefly and leaned back into the chair. Within seconds, his breathing slowed. He had fallen asleep. Emily looked at him in surprise. The powerful stranger everyone had ignored and recorded was suddenly nothing more than a tired son carrying too much pain. And as she sat there listening to the rain tap softly against the glass, she had no idea that this quiet moment would soon become the beginning of a mystery neither of them saw coming. Emily remained in the chair across from him for another 15 minutes. The rain outside showed no sign of stopping, and the hotel lobby had grown quieter as the evening slipped toward midnight. She checked the time and knew she should leave. Every responsible part of her mind reminded her that she had groceries to buy, bills to worry about, and a little boy waiting at home. Yet every time she stood up, she found herself sitting back down. Eventually, the concierge approached with a sympathetic smile. "We can take care of him from here, ma'am." Emily nodded. "Good. I just did not want him left alone." The employee glanced toward the sleeping man. "That was kind of you." Emily offered a small smile. Kindness felt like a luxury she could barely afford these days, but somehow she had never learned how to stop giving it away. Before leaving, she pulled a small notepad from her purse. After a moment of hesitation, she wrote a single sentence. "Take care of yourself." Then she folded the paper and handed it to the concierge. Could you give him this when he wakes up? The man nodded. Of course. Emily stood and adjusted her coat. As she turned toward the exit, she glanced back one final time. The stranger had not moved. The soft firelight illuminated his face, and for the first time all evening he appeared peaceful. Whatever burden he carried seemed temporarily quiet. Then Emily stepped back into the storm and disappeared into the Chicago night. Nearly 40 minutes later, she unlocked the door to her small apartment. The familiar scent of laundry detergent and macaroni greeted her. Mrs. Henderson looked up from the couch and smiled. He finally fell asleep. Relief flooded Emily's chest. Thank you. She quietly stepped into Noah's room. Her son slept curled beneath a faded blue blanket, one arm wrapped around a stuffed dinosaur that had survived years of love and countless trips through the washing machine. Emily brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and listened to the steady sound of his breathing. Moments like this reminded her why she kept going. No matter how difficult life became, Noah was always the answer to every question. After Mrs. Henderson left, Emily sat alone at the kitchen table with a calculator, unpaid bills, and a cup of reheated coffee. The numbers refused to cooperate. Rent was due in 9 days. Noah's medication refill was approaching. Her old car had started making a noise she could not afford to investigate. By 1 o'clock in the morning, exhaustion settled into her bones. She finally pushed the papers aside and went to bed. Across the city, the man she had helped slowly opened his eyes. The hotel lobby was nearly empty now. For several seconds he seemed disoriented. Then memory returned piece by piece. The rain, the crowd, the woman. He sat upright. Where is she? The concierge looked up from behind the desk. She left about an hour ago, sir. Something flashed across his face. Disappointment. Did she leave a name? No, sir. The concierge handed him the folded note instead. The man unfolded it carefully. His eyes remained fixed on the simple message. Take care of yourself. He read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Most people who approached him wanted something. Access. Influence. Favors. Money. Yet the woman who had stayed when everyone else walked away had asked for nothing at all. He turned the paper over. There was no phone number. No last name. Nothing. The concierge hesitated before speaking. She seemed genuinely concerned about you. A faint smile appeared. I know. He slipped the note into his coat pocket. Then his expression grew thoughtful. Did you happen to notice the bracelet she was wearing? The concierge looked surprised. The silver one. Yes. I remember it. The man's gaze drifted toward the rain-streaked windows. The bracelet had awakened something he could not quite explain. A memory buried beneath years of responsibility and loss. A memory connected to his mother. For the first time in a very long while, Daniel Harrison found himself thinking about something other than board meetings, quarterly reports, and corporate acquisitions. He was thinking about a stranger. Somewhere in Chicago, a single mother was probably asleep after another difficult day. She believed their paths had crossed for a few hours and ended. Daniel stared at the note once more before slipping it back into his pocket. For reasons he could not yet explain, he had a feeling this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The next morning arrived with clear skies and pale sunlight spilling across the Chicago skyline. For Emily Carter, however, the weather changed very little. Her alarm sounded at 5:30 in the morning, and within minutes she was moving through the familiar routine that governed her life. Coffee brewing. Lunch packed. Noah gently awakened for school. Every hour already accounted for before the day had properly begun. By 7:15, she was helping Noah button his jacket near the apartment door. Do you think it will rain again today? He asked. Emily smiled. I checked the forecast. We are safe for at least one day. Noah grinned. Good. I am tired of puddles. She laughed softly and kissed the top of his head. Moments like this grounded her. No matter how complicated life became, Noah had a way of reducing everything to simple truths. Once he was safely at school, Emily headed downtown toward Harrison Technologies. The glass tower rose above the surrounding buildings like a monument to success. Every morning she entered through the employee entrance with hundreds of others, blending into the flow of workers carrying coffee cups and laptops. Most days, nobody noticed her. She preferred it that way. Meanwhile, several floors above the city, Daniel Harrison stood in his office overlooking Lake Michigan. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered one of the most expensive views in Chicago, but he barely glanced at it. Instead, he was staring at a folded piece of paper resting on his desk. "Take care of yourself." The words looked strangely out of place among acquisition reports, financial forecasts, and board meeting agendas. "Hey!" Sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. His executive assistant entered carrying a tablet. "Good morning. Your schedule is completely booked until 6:30. Daniel nodded absent-mindedly. "I need a favor." She looked surprised. "Of course. I want to find someone." Her expression shifted immediately. "A business contact?" Daniel hesitated. "Not exactly." Within an hour, the search had quietly begun. Security footage from the hotel was reviewed. Taxi records were examined. Employees made discreet inquiries. Yet the mystery proved surprisingly difficult. The woman had paid for nothing, signed nothing, left no contact information. It was as if she had appeared for a few hours and then vanished back into the city. By noon, Daniel found himself irritated by the lack of progress. He was not accustomed to unanswered questions. Harrison Technologies employed thousands of people. Entire teams existed to solve complex problems. Yet somehow locating one kind stranger seemed impossible. "We have a partial image from the lobby cameras," his assistant reported later that afternoon. Daniel studied the photograph displayed on her tablet. The image was slightly blurred, but there she was. Dark blonde hair, simple coat, silver bracelet. He stared at the bracelet longer than the rest of the image. Something about it continued to pull at his memory. "Keep looking," he said quietly. "I want to know who she is." Across the building, Emily spent her afternoon reconciling financial reports. The work was repetitive but dependable. She appreciated predictable things. Predictable things paid rent. Shortly before 4 o'clock, her manager stopped beside her desk. "Do not forget tomorrow's company-wide meeting." Emily looked up. "The annual leadership presentation?" "Exactly. The entire department is expected to attend." She nodded. Every year, the company's executives addressed employees regarding future plans. Most workers viewed it as a long interruption to their workload. Emily had never even seen the chief executive officer in person. She knew his name, of course. Everyone in Chicago's business world knew the name Daniel Harrison. His company appeared constantly in financial news and business magazines. To Emily, however, he might as well have lived on another planet. Their worlds were too different to ever intersect. As the afternoon faded into evening, Daniel finally left his office. The search had produced almost nothing. Yet one detail remained lodged firmly in his thoughts. The bracelet. The memory connected to it hovered just beyond reach. Then suddenly, as he entered the elevator, something clicked. A flash of memory surfaced. His mother standing in a small workshop years ago. A collection of handcrafted silver bracelets spread across a wooden table. A charity event. A donation project she had supported before her death. Daniel stopped walking. His pulse quickened slightly. For the first time, he had a direction. A real lead. Somewhere in Chicago, answers existed. And entirely unaware of the search unfolding around her, Emily Carter finished her workday, collected her belongings, and headed home. Tomorrow she would attend a company meeting she expected to forget by lunchtime. What she did not know was that tomorrow would be the day her ordinary life collided with the man she believed she would never see again. The following morning began like any other. Emily barely had time to finish her coffee before rushing Noah through breakfast and out the door. By the time she arrived at Harrison Technologies, the lobby was already crowded with employees heading toward the annual leadership presentation. Conversations echoed through the building as people carried notebooks and coffee cups toward the large auditorium on the 20th floor. Most were expecting the same speeches they heard every year. Revenue goals, expansion plans, corporate updates. Emily expected nothing different. She found a seat near the back beside two co-workers from accounting. "Think they will keep us longer than an hour?" one of them whispered. Emily smiled. "Probably." The lights dimmed slightly as hundreds of employees settled into their seats. A massive screen illuminated the stage. Soft music played through hidden speakers. Then the presentation began. Department leaders spoke first. Charts appeared. Growth projections followed. Everything felt predictable. Emily listened politely while occasionally checking the time. Across the room, executives occupied the reserved front section. She paid them little attention. Then the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage once more. "And now, please welcome the founder and chief executive officer of Harrison Technologies." The room erupted into applause. Emily glanced toward the stage without much interest. Then her breath caught. The man walking into the spotlight was the same man she had left sleeping in the hotel lobby 2 nights earlier. For a moment she thought she must be mistaken, but there was no possibility of that. The same blue eyes, the same dark hair, the same calm expression. Only now he wore a tailored navy suit instead of a rain-soaked overcoat. The entire auditorium rose to its feet. Emily remained frozen in her chair. Her mind struggled to connect the exhausted stranger from the hotel with the billionaire CEO standing confidently before thousands of employees. Daniel Harrison looked entirely different beneath the stage lights. Strong, composed, powerful. Yet she immediately recognized him. As applause faded, Daniel began speaking. His voice carried effortlessly throughout the room. He spoke about innovation, responsibility, and the future of the company. Employees listened attentively. Emily heard almost none of it. Her thoughts raced. She had spent hours worrying about a man whose face appeared regularly in business magazines. She had offered water to one of the most influential executives in the country without having the slightest idea who he was. A strange mixture of embarrassment and disbelief settled over her. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel paused briefly while speaking. His gaze swept across the audience. Thousands of faces looked back at him. Suddenly his eyes stopped moving. Emily felt her stomach tighten. Even from the back of the room, she knew he had seen her. The moment lasted only seconds. His expression remained professional. He continued speaking without interruption. Nobody else appeared to notice. Yet Emily could not shake the feeling that something significant had just occurred. The presentation continued for another 40 minutes. By the end, employees were already discussing lunch plans and afternoon meetings. Chairs scraped against the floor as people began filing toward the exits. Emily gathered her notebook and stood. She wanted nothing more than to return quietly to her desk. But before she reached the aisle, a voice echoed through the auditorium speakers. Emily Carter. Conversations immediately stopped. Hundreds of heads turned. Emily froze. For a second, she wondered if there was another Emily Carter in the room. Then she saw Daniel standing near the edge of the stage. He was looking directly at her. The silence became almost uncomfortable. "Would you please stay for a moment?" he asked. Confused murmurs spread throughout the audience. Employees exchanged curious looks. Managers looked puzzled. Nobody understood what was happening. Emily certainly did not. Her heart began pounding. She slowly sat back down while the auditorium emptied around her. Minutes later, only a handful of executives remained. Daniel stepped down from the stage and walked toward her. Every eye in the room followed him. When he finally stopped in front of her, a warm smile appeared. It was the same smile she had seen beneath the hotel lights. "I have been looking for you," he said quietly. Emily stared at him in complete disbelief. "You have?" Daniel nodded. "For 2 days." Then his eyes drifted briefly toward the silver bracelet resting on her wrist. The smile faded into something more thoughtful. "And I think there is something you need to know." Emily followed Daniel into a private conference room overlooking the city. The glass walls muted the sounds of the busy office outside, leaving only a quiet stillness between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Emily still struggled to process what had happened. 2 days earlier, she had met a tired stranger in a hotel lobby. Now she was standing across from one of the most powerful business leaders in the country. Daniel gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." She did. Her hands rested carefully in her lap. "I had no idea who you were," she admitted. A faint smile appeared on his face. "I know. If I had known, I probably would have been much more nervous." That earned a brief laugh from him. It was the first genuine laugh she had heard. "Honestly, I am glad you did not know." Emily tilted her head slightly. "Why?" Daniel looked toward the window for a moment before answering. "Because you were the only person that night who treated me like a person instead of a title." The words settled quietly between them. Emily did not know how to respond. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and removed the folded note she had written. The paper showed faint creases from being opened many times. "I have carried this with me since that night." Emily stared at it in surprise. "It was only a note." "No," Daniel said softly. "It was kindness." For a brief moment his expression darkened with memory. "Most people around me assume I do not need help. They assume money solves everything." His gaze lowered to the note. "It does not." Emily thought about the exhaustion she had seen in his eyes that night. Now she understood it a little better. Success often looked impressive from a distance. Up close, it could be lonely. Daniel carefully returned the note to his pocket. Then his attention shifted to her bracelet again. May I ask you something? Emily nodded. Of course. Where exactly did your mother get that bracelet? Her fingers instinctively touched the silver band around her wrist. I'm not completely sure. She received it years ago, before she passed away. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Did she ever tell you the story? Emily thought for a moment. Only once. A small smile appeared as she remembered. She said a woman gave it to her during a charity event when she was struggling financially. My mother was raising me alone back then. She always said that bracelet reminded her that good people still existed. Daniel became very still. Do you remember the woman's name? Emily shook her head. No. What? Daniel slowly opened a folder resting on the conference table. Inside was an old photograph. He slid it toward her. Emily looked down. The image showed a smiling woman standing beside a display of handcrafted jewelry. Her eyes immediately widened. That is the bracelet. Daniel nodded. My mother made those by hand. Emily looked up in disbelief. Your mother? Every one of them. He smiled faintly. She donated them during charity events across Chicago almost 20 years ago. Emily stared at the photograph again. Suddenly her mother's story felt much closer than it had moments earlier. Then it is possible that my mother gave that bracelet to your mother, Daniel finished quietly. Neither spoke for several seconds. The coincidence felt almost impossible, yet both knew it was real. Emily looked down at the bracelet resting on her wrist. She had worn it nearly every day for years. A simple piece of silver, a connection she never knew existed. Daniel leaned back in his chair. That is why I could not stop thinking about it. His voice softened. The moment I saw it, I felt like I had seen a ghost. Emily smiled gently. Maybe our mothers met before we did. Daniel smiled as well. Maybe they did. Outside the conference room, employees continued moving through hallways and meetings as if nothing unusual had happened. Inside, however, two lives that should never have crossed paths were slowly discovering they had been connected long before either of them knew it. When Emily finally left the conference room, the rest of the workday felt strangely unreal. She returned to her desk carrying the weight of a conversation she could barely explain to herself. Around her, co-workers answered emails, discussed deadlines, and prepared reports. Yet more than once she caught people glancing in her direction. News traveled quickly inside large companies, and everyone had seen the chief executive officer personally stop an auditorium full of employees just to speak with her. By late afternoon, curiosity had become impossible to ignore. Okay, one coworker finally whispered. What exactly was that about? Emily smiled awkwardly. Nothing dramatic. The woman laughed. The chief executive officer does not personally search for people for nothing dramatic. Emily could not argue with that. Fortunately, her phone buzzed before she had to answer. A message from Noah appeared through the school application she used. The photo showed him proudly holding a science project made from cardboard and paint. A smile immediately softened her face. Her coworker noticed. Your son. Emily nodded. My favorite person. That evening, after work, she picked Noah up from an after-school program and listened as he excitedly explained every detail of his project during the drive home. The conversation involved planets, dinosaurs, and at least one imaginary astronaut. Emily listened carefully to every word. Children had a way of making the world feel simpler. For a little while, she almost forgot everything that had happened. Almost. Meanwhile, several miles away, Daniel sat alone in his office long after most employees had gone home. The city glowed beyond the glass walls, stretching endlessly beneath the evening sky. In front of him rested the photograph of his mother and the display of silver bracelets. Beside it sat a recent photograph of Emily's bracelet taken earlier that afternoon with her permission. The similarities were undeniable. Daniel leaned back in his chair. For the first time in years, memories of his mother felt vivid instead of distant. He remembered her belief that small acts of kindness could alter lives in ways nobody expected. As a child, he had admired that belief. As an adult, buried beneath responsibility and success, he had almost forgotten it. Yet somehow Emily Carter had reminded him. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. His assistant stepped inside. You are still here? She asked. Daniel smiled faintly. Apparently. She noticed the photograph on his desk. Did you find what you were looking for? He considered the question carefully. Not exactly. What does that mean? Daniel glanced toward the city lights. I started looking for a stranger. A thoughtful expression crossed his face. Instead, I found a story. His assistant smiled politely, even though she clearly did not understand. After she left, Daniel gathered his things and headed home. The following afternoon, Emily received an unexpected call from Human Resources. Her first reaction was concern. Most employees associated unexpected calls from Human Resources with problems. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked cautiously. The representative laughed. "Not at all. We are organizing a family appreciation event this weekend for employees and their children." Emily relaxed slightly. "Okay. We would love for you and Noah to attend." She thanked them and promised to think about it. After the call ended, she returned to work without realizing another detail. Her name had not been selected randomly. Later that evening, Daniel reviewed the event attendance list. When he saw Emily's name appear, he felt an unexpected sense of relief. He was not entirely sure why. Perhaps because he wanted to thank her properly. Perhaps because he wanted to learn more about the woman who had quietly changed something inside him. Or perhaps because, after years of surrounding himself with successful people, he had finally met someone who reminded him what truly mattered. Across the city, Emily tucked Noah into bed and turned off his bedroom light. Neither of them knew that a simple family event scheduled for the weekend was about to reveal a truth far more important than a bracelet, a photograph, or a coincidence from the past. Saturday arrived bright and clear, the kind of Chicago morning that seemed determined to make people leave their homes. Emily almost changed her mind 3 times before finally agreeing to attend the company family event. Crowds were not really her thing, and neither were corporate gatherings. But Noah had been excited the moment she mentioned there would be games, food trucks, and activities for children. By 10 o'clock, they were walking through a large lakefront park reserved for the event. Colorful tents stretched across the grass while employees and their families gathered beneath the warm sunshine. Laughter drifted through the air. Children raced between activity stations carrying balloons and prizes. Noah's eyes widened. "This is amazing." Emily laughed. "You have been here for 12 seconds. And it is already amazing." Within minutes, he disappeared toward a science demonstration area, leaving Emily smiling behind him. Watching him happy was one of the few things capable of making her forget every unpaid bill waiting at home. Nearby, Daniel Harrison arrived with considerably less fanfare than most people expected. He deliberately avoided entourages whenever possible. The event had always been his favorite company tradition because it reminded him that employees were not numbers on spreadsheets. They were parents, children, and families building lives beyond office walls. As he greeted workers and shook hands, his eyes occasionally drifted through the crowd. Eventually, he spotted Emily sitting on a folding chair beneath a shade tent, watching Noah launch a small model rocket into the air. Daniel paused. For a moment, he simply observed. The expression on Emily's face was different from the one she wore at work. Softer, lighter. The exhaustion that often lingered behind her eyes seemed temporarily absent. Then Noah ran back toward her, nearly bursting with excitement. Emily knelt to his level and listened as though every word mattered. Daniel smiled. They did matter. That was the thing he admired most about good parents. They treated small moments as important because children did. A few minutes later, Daniel approached. "Looks like someone is having a good day." Emily looked up and smiled politely. "I think he has already decided this is the greatest event in company history." Noah turned immediately. "Are you the boss?" Daniel laughed. "That depends who you ask. Mom says you are the boss." Emily closed her eyes briefly. "Noah." "What?" he asked innocently. Daniel crouched down. "Your mom is correct." Noah studied him carefully. "You do not look like a boss." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What does a boss look like?" Noah thought for several seconds. "Older." Daniel laughed so hard that several nearby employees glanced over. Emily could not help laughing too. For the next few minutes, conversation flowed surprisingly easily. Noah described school projects. Daniel listened attentively. Emily watched the exchange with mild surprise. Most executives she had encountered seemed uncomfortable around children. Daniel appeared completely at ease. Then Noah suddenly began coughing. It was not severe, but Emily's expression changed immediately. She reached into her bag and handed him a small inhaler. Daniel noticed the movement. The concern in her eyes was impossible to miss. After Noah ran off toward another activity, Daniel looked back at her. "Asthma." Emily nodded. Since he was little. Is it serious? She hesitated before answering. Mostly manageable. Some months are harder than others. The careful wording caught Daniel's attention. He recognized the tone. It was the voice of someone minimizing a struggle because they were used to carrying it alone. Before he could ask more, a company physician participating in the event approached to greet employees. After a brief conversation, the physician casually mentioned Noah's name. He is a strong kid, she said warmly, especially considering everything he has dealt with. Emily's smile faded slightly. Daniel noticed immediately. What do you mean? He asked. The physician seemed surprised. You did not know? Emily lowered her eyes. Doctor, realization crossed the physician's face. I am sorry, but the words had already been spoken. Daniel looked from the doctor to Emily. Something was clearly being left unsaid. A quiet tension settled over the conversation. For the first time since meeting her, Daniel had the unmistakable feeling that behind Emily's strength was a burden far heavier than she ever allowed anyone to see. The physician quickly changed the subject, but the moment lingered long after she walked away. Daniel watched Emily carefully. He had spent years negotiating billion-dollar deals and reading people across conference tables. He recognized the look in her eyes. It was the look of someone protecting a truth she did not want others to carry. For a while neither spoke. Nearby, children laughed as they raced between activity booths. Music drifted from speakers hidden among the tents. The world continued moving around them. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. You do not have to tell me anything you do not want to. Emily looked down at the bracelet on her wrist. Noah was born with a respiratory condition that required more treatment than most people realize. Her voice remained calm, but Daniel could hear the exhaustion beneath it. He is doing much better now. Most days you would never know. But, Daniel asked gently. Emily smiled sadly. But getting here was not easy. She explained years of specialist appointments, medications, insurance battles, and sleepless nights spent beside hospital beds. Nothing dramatic. Nothing sensational. Just the quiet struggle that thousands of parents carried every day. Daniel listened without interrupting. What struck him most was not the hardship. It was the way she described it. There was no self-pity. No bitterness. Only love. Every decision she made seemed to begin and end with Noah. Why did nobody at work know? Daniel finally asked. Emily laughed softly. Because everyone has their own problems. Mine are not special. Daniel looked toward the field where Noah was teaching another child how to launch a foam rocket. I think they are very special to him. Emily followed his gaze and smiled. Several minutes passed before Daniel spoke again. When I was a child, my mother used to say something. Emily turned toward him. What was it? She said that the people who change your life are rarely the ones with the most power. His eyes softened. They are usually the ones who show up when they do not have to. Emily immediately thought about the rainy night outside the hotel. Daniel thought about it too. You could have walked away, he said quietly. Everyone else did. Emily shrugged. You looked like you needed help. Exactly. His voice grew thoughtful. You saw a person, not a title. For a moment neither spoke. Then Daniel reached into his pocket and removed the folded note she had written. The edges had become worn from being carried so often. This note reminded me of who my mother was. Emily blinked in surprise. Daniel continued. And it reminded me of who I want to be. Later that afternoon, as the event began winding down, Daniel asked Emily and Noah to walk with him along the lakefront path. The water sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Sailboats drifted across the distance. Noah ran a few steps ahead, chasing seagulls with determined enthusiasm. Daniel smiled. He is a good kid. He is the best thing that ever happened to me. Daniel nodded. I can see that. Then he stopped walking. There is something I would like to do. Emily immediately shook her head. Daniel. He laughed. You do not even know what I am going to say. I know enough. It is not money. She looked relieved. Good. It is opportunity. Daniel explained that Harrison Technologies was launching a new employee development initiative. Flexible schedules. Expanded family support resources. Better healthcare navigation for parents managing long-term medical needs. Programs that would help hundreds of employees, not just one. Emily stared at him. You are doing all that. Daniel smiled. My mother believed kindness should multiply. He looked at Noah playing near the water. So do I. As the sun slowly began to set over Chicago, Emily realized something important. Daniel had not tried to repay her. He had done something far more meaningful. He had taken a single act of kindness and turned it into something that could help countless families. Nearby, Noah laughed as a seagull escaped his pursuit once again. Emily smiled. Life was still imperfect. Bills would still arrive. Challenges would still exist. But for the first time in a very long while, the future felt a little brighter. And somewhere above the sparkling water and golden evening light, it almost felt as though two mothers who once believed in the power of simple kindness were smiling too. Because sometimes the smallest decisions create the largest echoes. And sometimes helping a stranger changes far more than one life.